known Travis for several years. We first met at an event hosted by Congresswoman Sinema. He was working with Operation Freedom Bird at the time. I'm sure Travis will tell you a little bit more about his background and the pathway that brought him to today. But know that Travis is a Army veteran, a combat veteran. He is very active in numerous veteran organizations to include the Unified Arizona Veterans. And like yesterday's speaker, Mike Wold, Travis was inducted into the Arizona Veterans Hall of Fame class of 2019. Travis, thank you for participating with us this week. And now you have our undivided attention for the next 20 minutes, and I'll give you a 5-minute warning, and then we'll transition to Q&A. When the questions are done, we'll just do an open mic with any time that's left. Travis, we're all ears.
Well, Tom, I appreciate it. And it has been a few years since we met. When I was chasing you around that event when I had my back surgery and I was on a walker, and you were a little tough to catch. That's a busy guy. Everybody knows Tom knows he's an on-the-go kind of person. I appreciate y'all showing up today and wanting to hear a little bit about, what I might have to offer in the veteran suicide space. And what I do is I bring the lived experience to that. I've had my own go-arounds with the suicidal ideation and the things that happen, and I was concerned about that after it happened. And just so you know that it's been 7 years now. As a matter of fact, it was April 24th of 2013 when that happened. So to give you an idea of that background and what enables me to speak to this is that was the day that I had walked past my wife of 28 years and went into my office, and in that room, there was a gun and a phone and a choice. And now a lot of you know Jim Thomas from the chamber, and he has taken to where he'll run around and dole out these veteran suicide cards to just anybody, everybody, leaves them places. He and I were talking about that at a meeting. So from April 24th of 2013, I want to show you something. This is one of those cards, and this is not just any card. This is that card from that day. There are many cards like it, but this one is mine. You may be able to see the notches on it, so I'll know it. So I kept that card, and what happened is I went in there and I sat down and I got to thinking about things, and I had just picked this card up at the Globe VA when I was living up in Globe at the time, and I looked at that card and I thought, you know what? My wife deserves a phone call. So I called those people, and that started my journey towards being in the VA mental health system, the vet center system. I guess you might call it the greater veteran community, especially here in Arizona. And I got to looking at that as time went by. I went on Freedom Bird in 2014. That was a life-changing experience for me. I met Tom and a lot of the people that are here on this call today in 2015, the year after that, when I started advocating for Freedom Bird and moving out into the veteran community to raise awareness for them. But the whole time I kept thinking, how did that happen? How did I come to that point in that place? And, my story is no greater than anybody else's. I'm just a man that kept my word. I went in the Army in '87, and I was deployed twice. I did a tour in Korea, and I was in the Gulf War. And I didn't look at that as any great thing. That was just what was expected. I was raised by a man that had been through World War II. So that was his aspect, was that's just what people did. That was the expectation. And I've come to learn that even World War II generation people have had issues with suicide, and Vietnam generation. And I just began looking at what that looks like to have arrived at that place. And I thought, if it can happen to me, as much adversity as I've undergone in my personal life, my military life, it can happen to anybody. So I began to wonder, what is it that I can do? What do I have to offer in this space? And I thought, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a therapist. I don't want to be one. I entertained that idea for a while, but I thought maybe that's not the place that I need to be. I thought what I do have is the perspective. What I do have is the ability to have noticed all these things as time went on, because I began writing in the early 90s after I got out of the Army, and I kept all that writing. And I was able to look back in that and kind of track my journey with the journey I was on with other veterans. And to give you an idea of the perspective, I've been on Freedomburg 4 times. That's 45 combat vets each trip, plus all the ones I've met at the vet centers and everywhere else I've been. So it's no exaggeration for me to say that there's probably 500 veteran contacts in my phone. I have to back that phone up fairly regularly. So I'm not saying that is any kind of see you later, Deborah. I appreciate you showing up. I do know a lot of veterans, and I listen to them in PTSD groups and just visiting and on Freedom Burn, place like that. And I thought, how can I lend credibility to that narrative? How can I bring that out to people where they'll understand what veterans are thinking? I went to my first Coalition for Military Families Symposium in 2015. And a sentence that a VA clinician said to me at that time has stuck with me all this time. And she said, I wish I knew what those veterans were thinking. I wish I knew how to talk to them to where we could reach each other. I wish we could communicate better. And I thought about that for a second, and this is going to sound a little arrogant, and it probably is. I thought, well, I'm a veteran. I write. How tough could that be? I'll figure out some way to help that process along. Well, it was a little bit more than I thought it might be. It got deeper and deeper. And what I've done is I went down, way, way down. And I don't mean down as in a bad way. I mean down to, we all got the 30,000 foot level. Then we got the treetop view. Then we got the grass. And then we got the ground. Grunts live in the ground. The ground protects you. The ground will keep you safe during indirect fire from, cover concealment, things of that nature. I thought that those people need to understand. They're coming at it from the academic and clinical point of view, and they may not understand the cues, the signs that a veteran has given them. Now, we touched on this a little bit yesterday with Mike Wold when he talked about how in the veteran world, trust is everything. And right behind trust is integrity. Those are very two interrelated aspects of the conversation. If a veteran doesn't trust you, if they don't think you have integrity, they're done with you. They may sit and listen to you, but trust me, the lights are not on, nobody's home. They just don't care anymore. So I thought, how do I get that first step? How do I help the clinician make that first step count? It might be the only encounter they get, because veterans go through life thinking, I may have to attack somebody, I may have to inflict violence, I may have to endure violence, I may have to survive violence. That's the lens they view the world in varying degrees. Some of them view it a little bit, some of them view it more and more. It's not like we're all the same. All veterans are not the same. They're not just one big old block of people. So a lot of these veterans, and I was one of those, the work that I did after the war was very safety conscious. So it did not help me in any way to become less situationally aware. I use that word instead of hypervigilant because it encompasses more. And I don't really care much for the word paranoid, because veterans prepare for things. They're ready to inflict or endure or survive that violence at any minute of every day. So in order for a clinician to approach a veteran in a way to where they're going to be able to talk to them and get them to listen to them, first of all, they have to display integrity, and the veteran has to be able to trust them. Veterans speak the language of action. They're not interested in what you said. They're not interested in what you did yesterday. They're interested in what you're going to do. What is applicable to the situation right now? That's the first word in an operation order: situation. Veterans understand situations, and they work to resolve situations. What a lot of people don't understand, they'll ask, how can a veteran get to the point where suicide looks like a viable alternative? Well, I'll tell you what suicide is. Suicide is the resolution of a situation. It is not the optimal one. It is not the one the family wants. It's not the one society wants. But to the veteran, when they come to that place, one way or another, it's over. Because you can only go so long, so many years, so much time of having this uncertainty of, am I going to live or die? Am I going to be a decent human being? How am I going to live with the things I may or may not have done during warfare, during combat? How am I going to live with dead civilians, having to kill children, things of that nature? Even if they didn't, there's a certain amount of that violent aspect in all of them. So you got to start out on the right foot. And Carl, is it okay if I share the screen with everybody? or I sent it to you last night. I don't know if you have it. I have one little graphic because I told Tom there would be no death by PowerPoint.
Yeah, I have it. Hang on. I'll be happy to put it up for you. You just tell me when to take it off.
All right. So what I did is I slapped together this little screenshot right here. It's very simple.
Oh. Sorry.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is a couple of definitions. So on the left, we're going to have the definition of assume, and look at how the number 4 is circled in red. To take as granted or as true, to suppose. I'm here to tell you that combat veterans are trained to not assume anything. You do not take anything for granted. You pay attention to detail. You check to make sure the weapon is clean. You check to make sure your gear is tied off. You check to make sure you check all these things, because that's the language of action. So veterans don't assume when it comes to that kind of stuff. That's not a trait they're really schooled in. So when we turn over to presume, we look at to suppose to be true without proof, to take for granted, to expect or assume, especially with confidence. And you might be wondering where I'm going with this. Assume is somebody to take for granted for somebody on their own merits. That's somebody thinking, well, this is just how it is. And to presume is basically to assume something on the behalf of somebody else. So if the veteran assumes something, the clinician or the provider may presume. And what you cannot assume or presume when it comes to veterans is that they have within them the desire to continue existence. You cannot assume that, because you don't know what their life is. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what is going to be the one little thing, the one catalyst that is going to turn the risk and reward equation south, where it's all going to be like, you know what, this is it. I've had it. I'm going to resolve this situation and I won't have to mess with it anymore. And that's basically what it is. Okay, Carl, I'm done if everybody else is done. Okay. So when I talk to providers and people that are wondering, how do we approach veterans? How do we talk to them in their language? Remember that they deal in action. Veterans deal in action mostly. I mean, like I said, not all veterans are in this block. There's a lot of veterans that perhaps they go in the Navy and they go on a ship and they work in an industrial environment. So they may not be as affected by that need to go out and inflict or survive or endure violence in the warfare environment. But believe me when I tell you that grunts are trained for that, and there's levels of that. Combat engineers, everybody supports the infantry. Everybody leans towards that, projecting combat power and lethal means. So everybody is going to be aware at a certain implicit level that they are part of a system that is there to deprive other individuals of life for outcomes. And that works on people implicitly in various ways. That's what happened to me. I thought, wow, I've gone and served my country. I've been deployed a couple times. I've been downrange, been to war, went to war with Vietnam veterans in the Gulf War. I was trained by Vietnam veterans in Korea. You know, they referred to it as like the training jungle, because it was not quite as tough as Vietnam, although it did have its moments. So when we're looking at that stuff at a very basic level, that's what veterans, that's how you build a relationship with them. They have to trust you. They have to know that the things you say are going to have integrity, and you're not minimizing them. Well, everything's going to be okay. Or here, this will give you hope. You know, like I said, you don't know the entirety of their experience. You don't know what they're carrying around with them. I mean, I have met veterans that have had to kill children, had to kill women, and especially like that's part of my own personal moral injury is I had to train American soldiers, young American soldiers, how to kill women and children. And when you look in their eyes and you tell them that you will have to do this, or you will die, or your buddy will die, or something, you will die from this, you can just see a little piece of their soul die right there. That's not what they were told. It's not something that can be conveyed to them. It's something you only learn through experience. And when you look in their eyes and see that they understand that for a training purpose, not that they've had to do it yet, you can see that that changes who they are. That knob turns a little bit, and it does not turn in a positive direction, because they're like, what kind of world are we in where I may be called upon to kill a woman or a child? You know, especially Americans. There's multitudes of stories about how American troops will be in combat, and people that they were engaged with would use that against them, because that's a perceived weakness of the American military. You know, it's less and less as time has gone on, but that's an example of that kind of thing. So when we're dealing with the veteran and the clinician relationship, the veteran is going to come to the clinician, and they may or may not believe that the clinician has anything to offer them. I was one of these. To my enduring shame, I told my therapist one day, I said, I don't believe any of that psychobabble baloney. Whatever it was, I told her, I don't even remember where it was. I said, that sounds like a bunch of psychobabble. I don't remember the exact words. And a year later, I told her to her face, I said, I'm sorry I ever said that to you. I said, that disparages the training that you've undergone, the life that you've led of being of service to people, of veterans. Because literally all this woman's ever done since she got out of college, she was a veteran herself. She went in the Army and was a psychologist, and then has been employed by the VA and the vet centers all this time. So I told her, I said, I'm sorry I said that, because through the language of action that she had demonstrated to me, that she would hear me, would validate my feelings and say, you're not such a bad person for feeling this way. You're not the only one. And I thought, how can I replicate that? How can I, from my perspective, my credibility in the veteran population? I've had veterans that will only go to the VA hospital if I go with them. And I go because it's important to me that they go. I can't tell you how many of them I've dragged through that hospital, because I find value there. I find value in the fact that 14 out of the 20 or 22 a day that commit suicide are not in VA care. I was not treated well by the VA when I got out in 91. It was 18 years before I went back to the VA. So when I hear a Vietnam veteran tell me I've had them that have never been back since like 50 years, never been to the VA. I walk through them doors with them because I believe that there is a better outcome for them in those places. But what I'm trying to do is figure out, how do I translate that credibility into something that a clinician can say, wait a minute, I heard this wore out old grunt talking on a Zoom call one day, and he said this, and the light goes on. And then they say, you know, if I talk to this veteran in this manner, where I display integrity, perhaps I will have a better outcome. So if I can change that conversation, if I can move that needle just that little bit, I'm going to call that a good day's work, although I'm going to keep at it. I want to move that needle a lot, but I'll take what I can get. You know, Tom, I'm pretty sure that I've blathered on here for the better part of whatever time I got. So I'm about ready to start the question and answer and engagement with anybody that wants to, because like I said, we don't want to die on a PowerPoint. So I'm ready if you are.
Well, you were pretty close. You had 2 minutes to spare, but let me just check see what I got here. First question, Travis, is kind of funny to use the word assume. Is it okay to assume that the things you said in this veteran clinician relationship would also be generally true to someone that one of us would meet?
Yes. Well, by us, I'm gonna assume that they mean a non-provider, a non-clinician. That works for anybody.
And the next question is, what doesn't work?
Well, it's harder to prove a negative outcome than it is a positive one. But what I've seen veterans and what they've told me, and in my personal opinion, is I don't want people to run in there and we'll go from assume to presume and say, you know, you went to school, you studied the workings of the mind, you've done all this kind of stuff. But what you do not understand is that war is an environment unlike any other. War is where people find out that they are the keepers of life and death. It's an existential space. So when I hear people tell me, well, I'm going to do something to give you hope, I'm going to tell you what you're doing is you're minimizing my lived experience. You're telling me that the things that I've endured or what I've done or what I know does not matter. I don't want to hear that. A veteran doesn't want to hear that. They don't want people assuming about them. They don't want them thinking, well, you know, here's this person, they went in the military, they knew what they were getting into, which that's another one of my personal pet peeves, is that nobody can know what they're getting into when they go in the military, because the experience cannot be conveyed. It has to be lived to be understood. I cannot tell, even I, with my experience, cannot tell a young person to the level they need to know what could happen to them in the military, what it's going to do to them, what is going to change in them. So that, I hope that answers that person's question, that's what veterans don't like to hear. They would like people to meet them where they're at and understand that their experiences are different, and just take that going forward.
Yeah. Travis, I have a question. It's kind of not directly to the topic, but it bears directly on a lot of what you do. We all know that the Phoenix VA was kind of the epicenter of the VA scandal, and it's going to take a lot of years for those stains to be removed and for the public perception to change. And you and I know from our monthly meetings at UAV and the opportunity to talk with senior officials at the VA that a lot of work has been done. You have been an important part and a regular part of the VA functioning, and you've referenced that. Could you share with us from your perspective, because a lot of veterans, as you said, a lot of veterans just, you know, they know what they heard, they know what they believe, and may not really be interested in going to the VA. Could you share with us the Phoenix VA today as compared to the Phoenix VA 3 or 4 years ago?
The Phoenix VA is undergoing a continuous evolution of process improvement. And, you know, Tom, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm absolutely involved in that. I actually do trainings at the Phoenix VA for people on how to listen to veterans, and how my personal thing is that a veteran will not go to the VA because they think, well, I can find behavioral health there, or I can find this there. That doesn't apply to them. What a veteran wants to do, what they're trained to do, is to transcend. They're trained to transcend any situation, adapt and overcome. So if they could use that mindset, that's what I've told the leadership at the VA, show the value in that. And you might think, well, why should I have to tell a grown person why they need to take care of their health? But remember that veterans are different. They've been exposed to death, lethal means, the fact that they may be killed in combat. They may have to kill somebody else in combat. They may die. And there are people that go in that VA. I've seen them there, watched them, talked to them, helped them. They will get up out of a chair at that VA and walk out in the street and get run over and killed by a bus, and they will not care. They just don't care, because they've come to a point where it doesn't matter anymore. So what the VA has done, and Rima Nelson was instrumental in this, she started the Veteran Resource Center. She started looking at, where do we meet the veteran where they're at? And Dr. Smith has been a great driver of that initiative going forward, and the whole Phoenix VA leadership team. You know, in my personal history with the Phoenix VA is somewhat uneven. I used to drive past the VA in the 90s and know that I was not eligible for care there, because the VA did not treat the Gulf War veterans a lot like they did the Vietnam veterans and the Agent Orange. I was not eligible for VA care. So I drove past there thinking, that was not a place that I belonged. That was not a place I was welcome. That was not a place that was inclusive to me. And I have 28 months downrange. Out of my whole 4 years in the Army, 28 of those months are downrange in the desert, in the jungle, in below zero. 11 of those months are in below zero weather. I'm actually one of the few people you'll probably meet that are service connected for frostbite. I have been very cold. And that's a lot of reason why we're having this discussion in Arizona. So the VA has done, and I met Sharon Hellman before this whole thing went down. I was in a focus group up at the Globe VA. So I've seen the VA undergo a systemic process improvement. Now, does that mean that every person that runs in there is going to get the optimal outcome, that everything's going to go their way, that, you know, there's going to be a red carpet rolled out for them? Of course not. But am I going to tell people that the Phoenix VA is on its way up? I'm absolutely going to tell them that, because as individual human beings, our psyche, our what people call the reptile brain, is always primed for the negative, because you got to watch out for negative things, because negative things will kill you. Nobody runs out of the house thinking, well, I've got to watch out for all them unicorns that are running around handing out glitter baskets. Never happens. But is there a chance that you could get hit in a car, you could get robbed or killed? Yeah, that's the things people focus on. So they focus on the negative outcomes. They focus on that one person that goes in the VA, maybe gets misunderstood, things don't happen right, and they walk right past the other 9 that walked out of there with a liver transplant, walked out of there with a stent. I've been inpatient at the Phoenix VA. I was treated well. They took care of me. They made sure all my issues were handled. And I know probably 100 veterans right off the top of my head I could name. The only thing is that nobody talks about the good stuff. Everybody's evolutionarily primed to focus on the negative. So I would absolutely testify that I stand here and say they are on their way to trying to figure out how to make that better for people.
Thanks, Travis. We have a question. Could you give some examples of action counseling the therapist could use or take to show that they care and want to understand to help the veteran?
Sure. And one of the easiest things to do is to communicate, because let's say for one magic moment, I'm a psychologist. I've been to school. I've been trained. I'm in the academic world. I'm in the professional world. I'm in the clinical world. So I'm a care provider. That's what I do. I provide care. Now, the veteran on the other end of that care, to them, that's all or nothing. Veterans do very few things to 50%. They start at 1% and they go to 200%. There's no dimmer. So to the care provider, they're going to say, oh my God, I didn't reach out and talk to this person. I didn't call them. I didn't let them know. They showed up at the VA and their appointment had been canceled. So what you've told that veteran in your language of action, what they're going to hear, you didn't mean nothing by that. Things happen. But when a person's in that space and maybe their reasoning faculties are compromised, they're going to say, that person did not care enough about me to tell me not to come down here. They didn't care enough about me to communicate with me. And when you're in the military and you're out in an operation, you have to communicate. You have to execute. So what that is, that's a failure to execute. And what that veteran takes away from that in the language of action, you don't care. And if you don't care about your other people when you're on a team, you're in a combat zone, if you're that person that does not care, if you cannot execute, if you cannot handle your end, you get pushed out to the edge of the herd. You don't survive, because, we're in a give and take kind of situation. I watch your back, you watch mine. The whole time I was in the Gulf War, until the last 2.5 weeks, my unit was on 50% security at a minimum. That meant a guy slept 2 hours and his buddy slept 2 hours, off and on like that for months. And you didn't want to be the guy that fell asleep, because that meant you're not paying attention. You can't be trusted to watch somebody's back in combat. If you can't even be trusted to stay awake, you can't even be trusted to make a phone call. I don't trust you. And then here goes that wall. Now we're done.
Hey, a related question, Travis. What are some questions you were asked or statements that made that helped you the most in your therapy?
Boy, that's a good one. I'm not going to kid you guys. A lot of that time is a little blurry because it was a little stressful, and I have migraines and they require medication. So a lot of that was, some of it's pretty hazy. The ones that were asked me specifically, or statements that were told to me, and this is the one that I share with people, is that when we're younger people, we do the best we can with what we know at the time. We as elder people, elders of our culture, we cannot judge the younger person by the mores that we have. Our experience, our wisdom has come through years of interacting with others like us, other elders. As we go through the procession of time, we become wiser, hopefully. It's not a given, but we hope to become older and wiser. So we have a storehouse of wisdom. A lot of what the problem is that these veterans do is they look back on that and they are very critical, with a critical inner voice, to say, I could have done better. I should have done better. I knew better. They did not know better. They learned better. And there's a big difference between knowing better and learning better. So when you learn those things, oftentimes at a great cost, oftentimes that tuition is paid in blood. A lot of times it's the blood of your friends. A lot of times it's your own blood. Sometimes it's the blood of children or women, non-combatants. You look back on that and say, I should have known better, but you're looking back from the time and space you occupy now to that younger person. And there's no way that person could know those things back then because the experience cannot be conveyed. It just cannot. So you learn these things at great cost. That's why people train and train and train and train to know these things. So I would say, be kind to your younger self was one of the things that I heard. Cut that younger person some slack. There's no way they could have known that. Because if we're in a group, and I tell PTSD groups this, these guys will sit around and they will kick their own butts until they dislocate their hip. I should have known better. I shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't, would have, couldn't, ought to. I said, you know what? A younger veteran will walk in that door and he'll do the same thing you're doing now. And you'll tell him, hey man, there's no way you could know that. Cut yourself a little slack. Nobody knows everything. I said, you'll do that for that younger veteran. Now go home and do it to the younger veteran in here tonight in the mirror. Do that to the younger veteran that's in here. Cut him some slack. There's no way he could have known those things. He had to learn them sometimes at a terrible cost. So cut him some slack. Cut her some slack. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to ask Wendy Shackley, could you ask Travis your question? I'm not sure I got the entire thrust of what you were trying to ask. I don't want to not do justice to your question.
Well, the question I had, Travis, is, you know, you've been on my panels and everything at my reintegration films and things. Do you really feel like if a clinician is there and asking the questions, is that a help at that time? Is it better to have a more in-depth conversation personally? What do you feel about the public forums? Does that make sense to you, what the question?
Hit me again.
Okay, so for clinicians who come to a veteran panel, let's say the reintegration films like I've been having, and they really want to find out, you know, what they can do to help, or I know the word help is not really the right word I'm thinking of, but to understand, I think that's a better word, to understand where they can be better at working with a veteran. Is it better to do it in that forum and a group type forum like that? Or is it better to ask the veteran, well, can I talk to you at a later time and learn more, or both?
Okay, well, I think I understand you, Wendy. I think we've had this discussion before. I would have to say that it's both sides have their advantages. If you are, like, one of my hopes, one of the things that I try to do is I try to reach clinicians. I don't per se go after the veteran population to tell them all this stuff, because I can talk to one veteran or I can talk to one clinician, and that clinician may talk to 10,000 veterans in their career. So I would rather reach the clinical population right now and start that change moving forward. So if it was me doing it, I would rather there be 20 clinicians and they can line up and take a shot at me all day long. I don't care. I would think that would be a better way to go, because for one thing, they'll be in their group. They'll be there to gauge their success via social cues and hear something. There'll be the networking aspect of it, the hypotheticals, the ideas that get bounced off of each other. And then that could be followed up if you talk to a veteran one-on-one, one that is like me, that's in a space to where they're able to articulate those things and tell them what they're looking at. So my personal hope is to reach more clinicians as time goes on, to have that conversation with them in a group.
Can I make a couple of remarks here? I am a clinician, and I've been working with people in crisis for, I don't know, 40 years, 35 years, something like that. I can tell you what needs to happen, and I really mean this. What needs to happen, you can hear the intensity in my voice. What needs to happen is honesty, directness, and no bullshit. You got to look at somebody, they got to believe you, they got to understand you know what you're talking about, that you can't be in their shoes because they've got their own shoes. But the fact of the matter is when you understand, you're clear and you're direct, and you send that message, and they look at you verbally and non-verbally and get that message, then you've got the basis for what I call a contract. That contract is honesty, directness, clarity, and a belief that this individual is going to be talking to me straight and clear. That's what needs to happen. Anything other than that is not going to work. Hear me? Not going to work. I've been in this business a lot of years, and I can tell you, you will never get the transference, the involvement, the commitment, and the caring that is necessary to help anybody if you can't show them that you really are a real person. And so whether you've lived in a foxhole or whether you've lived in a penthouse, it makes no difference. What you've got to be is honest, clear, direct, and focused, and being able to hear the person on the level at which he or she is saying something. That's what needs to happen, and that's a fact. I presume you agree.
Well, I'm not much of a presumer. I did
Tell me what
say
you don't agree on then.
I didn't say I didn't agree with any of it.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that that's basically what I just said by holding
that's right.
forth in the language of action.
That's right. And so action in that sense is the ability to get in and to show that you know how to act in a crisis situation that makes some level of sense and is realistic to the individual who's been in that situation himself. Otherwise, you don't get somebody to say that person has walked a mile in my shoes or has some level of understanding about what I'm talking about.
One of the things that we've heard all 3 days revolves around the word and the concept of trust, and clearly the mechanism to build trust involves a whole lot of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every day we've heard from Honor House, Mike Wold yesterday, Travis today, and you, Dr. Goodfield. I mean, there's just got to be honest communication. It's got to be real. It's got to be sincere. It's got to be believable. I think, my experience, even young veterans and, the troops when you're serving, they can smell out a phony in a heartbeat. And we've seen that time and time again, whether it's an NCO or an officer, and just doing their best to blow smoke up the backside. And troops are really smart at spotting a phony. And that's what I think one of the common things we've heard all 3 days and from Dr. Goodfield is that honesty and that sincerity and the believability. Travis, we got a slightly different question addressing messages should clinicians give to veteran spouses.
Boy, yeah, that's a little broad. Is there any clarity to that, or?
Pat, would you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, Travis, I was just wondering, when, spouses are working with clinicians and, their veteran partner is going through therapy, what part can they play in this? What messages should that clinician share with, with the spouses? How can the spouse help the veteran to get through this?
Boy, that is a good one. I am blessed and fortunate with my wife. We were married before I went in the Army. Her first husband was also in the military, so she's very conversant with that lifestyle. I would say that there would need to be a level of trust that the veteran could have towards the spouse. Because a lot of times, and this is going to build into what I view as my role to be. I don't view my role as being a therapist or a clinician. I'm the first step guy. I talk to veterans and I tell them, you know what, I want to help you take that first step. Maybe you're tired of running around, you know, your life has gone from this to now you're scared to go out. Now you don't want to do this. You only park here. You only do this. And then after a while, your life has only got to, now it's this big. Your life is only this big. But maybe you want it to go back out. So what that takes is they got to trust who they're dealing with. They got to trust the spouse, the clinician, that's what they're going to help them do. But the downside of that is if they're going to trust their spouse, they can't jump right ahead to the therapy. You don't walk into the clinician's office and the clinician says, we're going to start you on DBT. 12 weeks of that, all good. Not going to happen.
I would like to say something here, and that what I would tell you is that having been in the therapist role, having been in the different situations you're talking about, I completely agree with you. There's got to be some level at which there's clarity, belief, and a fundamental kind of an assumption that we are in this together and we're going to work as a team together to try to understand each other. And that, so here's what I do in those circumstances. I look for the hidden agenda. I look to see if the husband or the wife has a hidden agenda here, because sometimes people do. And if they feel like they've been bombarded for a long time by the husband or the wife's problem, it does something to how they relate to each other. So in that sense, what I try to do in those circumstances is to make sure that there's a clarity between those individuals involved, and to surface areas where I see that there's lack of clarity, and to try to get them to talk about the things that they don't talk about, and to just surface that with feedback about what I see when I see what they're doing. So in that sense, I believe it's really important to get to work as a team. If you're not a team, you know, it's not going to work. And there can be sometimes people on a team that want to sabotage the team. That doesn't sound nice, but it's true. So you've got to look at the hidden agendas and surface the agendas honestly, clearly, and directly with a level of feedback that can show what you're talking about. That it's not just some theoretical remark. You have to say, I noticed when that was said, you did this and that, and did you notice this? Let's talk about that. In other words, bring things to the surface so that the hidden agendas can be brought up and can be talked about honestly, clearly, and directly.
Travis, another question for you. How do you think would be the most effective way to reach out and capture the attention of those stubborn veterans who have that bitter taste of the veteran community and services? There are many whom don't associate but need the services that it provides. And I think you kind of referenced in your presentation, you know, how some veterans, based on those early experiences, to include perhaps some of yours, had that. You have any thoughts?
I do. I'm in the VA system now because another veteran that I worked with up in Globe, who was also a Gulf War veteran, and I never encountered this individual when I was younger, and I don't know how, because Globe is not a big town. I never encountered him, and I didn't know him in the Army. I didn't know any of this, but him and I were in the Gulf War, and he had served at Fort Carson when I was there as well. I don't understand how we didn't bump into each other, but what he did is, you know, he watched me dealing with these migraines, and to give you some context to this, a lot of people look in the rearview mirror and they say, oh, burn pits and migraines and musculoskeletal disorders. Back in the early 90s, nobody cared about that. The Gulf War was over. The services were being drawn down. You know, it didn't look like it was going to be that big a deal. And they just kind of left the Gulf War guys out in the breeze. And I could not get insurance because my warfare service was a pre-existing condition. So let that sink in for a moment. I have had migraines ever since the late 80s, early 90s when I got deployed the first time. I have them today. So I went all the way to 2010, 19 years of not being in the VA because they told me there was nothing they could do for me. There was no service connection. There was no anything. Too bad, so sad. Could not get insurance because it was a pre-existing condition. So I went through all that time without being able to get treatment for these migraines. And what those people told me was that I did not belong. How am I going to be you know, felt of value. So this one individual told me, he says, they changed all that, man. I said, I'm asking you to trust me. Go back to them, tell them who you are, take your 214 down there, talk to them. And I did. I took his advice. I said, only because it's you, I will trust you. And I went down there. So I feel that function now. But what I would like to do is, like we're doing today, this video is going to be on the Chamber of Commerce's website. It's the Southwest Veterans Chamber of Commerce website. I also have one in the Library of Congress. I was at a 2nd Infantry Division reunion, and I got, for lack of a better term, ambushed by the girl that was doing the Veteran History Project. So now I ended up in the video in the Library of Congress. What I want to do is I want to bring that communication out to people to say, yes, you may have had a bad experience at a VA. Yes, you may perceive the VA as being apathetic and not responsive to your needs. But I will put my credibility on the line that things can be different for you if you just believe me. You don't have to believe the clinician. You don't have to believe any of what they have in the existential space. I mean, you may have a Jaguar car and you take it to the Jaguar guy because he can fix it. You may not know how he does. You don't care. You drive it in, you drive it out. Or better than that, you tow it in and you drive it out. That's a real win. So I tell them, don't be down on a clinician because they're not a veteran. Don't be down because they didn't go to combat. I said, you're cutting yourself off. I said, the only thing you need to know about a knife is it's sharp. Is it going to cut?
Holding the knife knows what to do with it.
Is the tool you're going to use? Is it going to hold together for the job? So, because I get a lot of veterans, they say, how can they possibly know? And I says, you know what? They don't. Just be truthful. I don't understand what that's like. I don't know what 6 months of MREs and poncho liners in the desert's like. Got no idea what that's like. But what I do know is I was trained in school about how people's mind works. I've been a clinician. I learned how to relate to you and how I can help you transit your life from this big to this big. It may never be this big, but it may include your family. It may be not this little life. It might be this life, and that might be just enough. It's going to be better. You're going to transcend. You're going to adapt and overcome. See, I use those terms instead of recovery. I don't really handle the recovery model because I don't believe you can recover from existence. We're in the existential space as veterans. We stand ready to inflict and endure violence. That's existential. There's no recovery from that. There's adapting to it. And if that psychologist, if that psychiatrist, social worker, counselor, clinician knows those things up front and just tells you right to your face, you know what? I don't know what that's like. I'm not going to lie to you about it. But what I do know is there's a trust relationship we can build up. And I remember these words from the first session I had with the counselor that I still see. She said, we'll get there. You just got to trust me. I remember those words from that. And I thought, I don't have a whole lot else to lose. You know, what the heck? You know, I still got a gun at home.
Well, I would say this to you, that what I say in those circumstances, having been there many times, I say simply, I'm going to be there with you now. I'll be there with you now to the point that, and I will ask you this, did I understand you to your satisfaction? That's the first order of business with me, is when I'm working with somebody, I want to know that they know that I understand. And I'll ask them directly, did I leave something out? Did I add something that wasn't true? Am I there on the same page with you? And if I get a yes, then I ask the next question is, shall we work on this together? That's called asking for a contract. We get an agreement, then we start working out some step by step by step, and we're a team. We are not with me, the doctor, you, the patient. That's out. We are a team, and we work together as a team. Failing to work together as a team, as a clinician who trains therapists, by the way, I can tell you it will not work. The only way it works is if you're a team, you're together, you understand, and sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow. There's no judgment in between. We're a team, we go together, and we do it together. Just like in the military, just like in some kind of a bad situation, we're a team. And if we don't function as a team, you can die. Mm-hmm. And you can die emotionally, too.
Well, Travis, I know I speak for everybody on the call, just how much they appreciate your sharing your history, your background, your experience with us. You know, honesty and trust came out numerous times today, yesterday, and Monday. And I think everybody on the call recognizes that you've trusted us with your story,